Hello and welcome to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Alistair Bryce-Clegg and I'm your host for this week's TDS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm an early years author, trainer and consultant. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics that are aimed at supporting best practice in the early years and inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. And I'm delighted to introduce Steph Ainsworth as today's guest. Hello, Steph.
Hi, Alistair. It's lovely to be here.
How are you?
Not too bad. Just a bit nervous about being played over the airwaves, but good apart from that. Thank you.
You'll be great. Now, for anybody that doesn't know who you are, can you just give us a brief introduction as to who you are and what you do?
So as you say, I'm Steph Ainsworth. I'm a reader at Manchester Metropolitan University. Before I came here, I was a primary school teacher. I did spend some time in early years as part of that. And I've spent quite a lot of time teaching student teachers as well at Manchester Met. And at the moment, I'm spending quite a lot of time on research, but it's kind of research that's very close to practice. So it's hopefully the sort of research that might be of interest to schools, including early years settings.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's obviously, I know you through the university, but also through a piece of research that you did around the subject we're going to talk about today, which is resilience and teacher resilience. So to start this first episode, we talk a lot about resilience in children and what we do as practitioners and parents to try and make our children more resilient. But also I think we need to remember that it's really important that we as adults in our family lives, but also in our professional life, are really good at being resilient, especially in the climate that we work in today. So in terms of how would you define it? What do we mean by resilience, especially in terms of adults in the workplace?
Yeah, so it's a question that's been explored a lot more in the research than over recent years. It's become of interest. I think before it was researched, the sort of layman's definition of it tended to be about bouncing back, being able to kind of pull yourself together, just get on with it, when things are going wrong. But actually, understandings around that have shifted a bit, and it's more about thinking about the environment as well. So it is important to kind of be able to keep going and persevere in things. But actually, nowadays we're seeing resilience as more of a process. So it's not just something that's inside you, it's something that happens across a whole system. And I think that's important for both pupils and adults to realise that actually it's quite normal for people to have their ups and downs, and we need to be aware of what's causing those, as well as giving individuals the skills to kind of, get on with it and manage those ups and downs.
Yeah, I think if I think back to when I was a teen or younger, growing up in a small mining village in the northeast of England, mental health didn't really exist in terms of, it was never discussed. And I think the culture of our family, or the culture of how I grew up, was very much like you just get on with it and you kind of suck it up. I think also when I work in teaching environments, there is a real culture around first in, last out is often regarded as being the hardest worker, or you've got people who are there from literally the crack of dawn till when the caretaker's shaking their keys and chucking them out. And that, especially for me as a new teacher, that was seen as a real badge of honor because you were showing commitment to the job and commitment to the children. But actually, in terms of your mental health and resilience, it was rubbish because you have no life outside of that thing that you do in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that puts teachers most at risk, is that, on the positive side, teachers go into teaching because they love the children, they want to make a difference. They don't just go into it, for the holidays. It's very much a vocation, and that's brilliant. On the positive side, that really helps keep you going when you're having a difficult day. If you can kind of try and remember why you're here, why it's the best job in the world in lots of ways. But on the downside, because teachers are so committed and so intrinsically motivated to do the job, it puts them at risk because it's hard to put a boundary on that. And there's always so much more to do. You never get to the end of your to-do list.
This is true.
And we've been talking to lots of teachers in schools as part of the recent project the current project we're doing at the moment. And yeah, one of the teachers was saying how it's like everything's important. So how do you choose what not to do? Because you care so much about the pupils, about doing a good job. So yeah, I think that's a really good point you've made.
I think it's also that it's the culture, not only of the profession, so there's a kind of an overall culture and expectation, but also the culture of individual settings, whether that be a nursery, a school, where if we do recognize people go up and down in peaks and troughs with their mental health, and we do recognize that that is the same for all of us in lesser or greater extremes, then it's having that culture where you're saying within your setting that it's, in terms of leading the space, we're not going to put a badge of honor and being here first thing and last thing. And yes, we acknowledge that you never get everything done, because the thing about working with children, especially in the early years, but all children, is that when those under fives roll in through your door with their lack of self-regulation, with their joy and wonder of the world around them, with their never-ending questions, it's not about then being able to take a pause for breath during your day. That rarely happens. So you get there early, you've then got this wondrous ball of life that comes through the door and literally sucks the energy out of you. And then you stay for hours afterwards, often. And there's been some great reforms in the early years foundation stage, but it's often doing needless tasks that are maybe required by somebody else, or you perceive they're required by somebody else, but actually they don't impact on learning and development at all. So do you find there's lots of that in terms of how that feeds into people's resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just picking up on some of those points, it was making me think about how when I moved into early years from Key Stage 1, it was like I'd always been tired. Teaching's a tiring job, but the tiredness that you feel in early years when you get home is like another level, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's so physical. Like it's a
Yeah.
really physically demanding job. As you say, you're dealing with these wonderful young individuals, but they are, yeah, the regulation levels aren't there yet, and so you're doing a lot of regulating of feelings, a lot of regulating of toilet habits,
And it is.
regulating of
Yeah.
everything. And within that, you're regulating yourself because you've got to try and keep that lovely, positive, chirpy early years voice going. It's a performance in early years, and all these things are very tiring, aren't they? They take emotional energy, we take physical energy. So I think, yeah, these kind of things we're talking about are important for all teachers, but I think you need to be aware of, well, in the different key stages and different age phases, the sort of stresses will look slightly different, and so we need to be mindful of that and come up with coping strategies that work for teachers in their particular phase. So I think it is about, as you say, just acknowledging that you will be tired at the end of the day and there is only a limit of what you can do, and you need to sort of listen to your body because I think some days feel harder than others, and trying to think about what tasks can you manage at different points in the week more feasibly. And I completely agree with what you said about the sort of culture around hard work, and that's come up a lot in the research around long hours cultures. And it is really tricky, isn't it? Because to some extent, whichever school you're in, there's always loads to do, and there's sort of no getting around that. But I think what we've noticed from talking to different teachers is that schools have different ways of talking about it and thinking about it. And one of the things that's come up as being important for leaders in school at all levels, so not just heads, but kind of phase leaders, etc., is making it clear that how hard your staff are working. You know that there will be times when they have to say, no, I can't do that this week, or that's just too much for me. And also kind of modeling that. So I think particularly for new teachers, it's come up that kind of ECTs or sort of less experienced teachers find it a lot harder to prioritize and to sort of know what to focus on because there's so many things, and as I say, they all seem so important. So that kind of modeling from more experienced teachers and leaders is really important, and allowing people to say no, which I know is tricky because obviously leaders don't, as a phase leader, you don't want everyone just saying no to everything.
Yeah.
You're accountable, aren't you? And that you want the best for the children. But I think it's about having open conversations about these things and saying, um, what is the expectation around some of those elements that take a lot of your energy after school? You know, like you were saying, some things can feel a bit needless. So having conversations around, is there anything that we're doing now that isn't really benefiting the children that we could maybe do, either stop
Yeah.
doing completely or do in a different way? And there's no easy answers there. We all know this because there's a whole load of factors outside of individual schools that play into how we have to do things. But we have noticed through this research that schools are trying to find these little pockets of agency where they can do things a little bit differently, and those little changes can often have quite a big impact on how
Yeah.
people feel, and even just being acknowledged, I think, is a big part of it. So feeling listened to, and like people are aware how hard you're working and want to sort of at least try and find
I
different ways.
think, yeah, agency is key. So making sure that people find their own voice. I think also going back to the point you made about, when you're working with those children who are self-regulating or not self-regulating, and you've got to try and self-regulate as well, and you might not be feeling particularly resilient. I think there is, in days gone by, you would never have that conversation. You would never say to the person you were working with, I just, or this is going on, or I just feel like this today. And I think that there is thankfully more of that happening, but that needs to spread as a culture throughout the whole organization you're working for. But also a bit like on an aeroplane when you get that kind of thing where it says, if the oxygen mask comes down, put yours on first before helping others. I work with loads of early years practitioners that don't take time to self-regulate because you're too in the moment and you try and, but as you are dysregulated, that dysregulation leaks out. And therefore, as an observer, you can see how it has ramifications around the space. That kind of invisible dysregulative energy travels through the children. And that idea of coaching our practitioners to be able to think, right, the important thing is that I stop and try and, in whatever way we do it, in the time that you've got. And again, loads of things we're talking about. I know people listening and be going, well, that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, I've got a job that's like, you're telling me that, somebody's spilling sand on the floor, somebody else is, just being sick, somebody's
Yeah,
wiping their nose on my child's leg, and you're telling me I've got to take a calm moment, look at a crystal and self-regulate. So it's not what we're saying. I think it's the idea of thinking, I appreciate that to be as effective as I can be, it's more important that I am in a state of regulation than it is to just try and push on and push on. Because again, I think there's a culture of, and I know from working in settings, but also supporting settings now, people who come into work when they shouldn't necessarily be in work because they feel there's an obligation to be there because for the children, the staff. And then you get, again, people are just running themselves further and further down until their battery is empty. And that's when, and it does happen a lot in our profession, significant mental health episodes can occur and people end up being off for a very long time and in some respects not even coming back.
absolutely. That's it. It is. And I agree with you. It is really important to keep saying there aren't any easy answers. And I personally still find it really hard to know, when to stop and how to prioritize, etc. Because everything does seem so important. But I think what I have noticed is that some people seem a lot better at it than others. So I think it's really good to spot that if you know that as a teacher that's something you're not very good at, or that you find hard to set boundaries or to sort of work smart, as they say, which I know is a bit of a contentious term, but have noticed that there are a lot of teachers that say, yes, no, I can do this. I do have a boundary. I don't work at weekends. And I'm always like, how do you do that? So I think it's really, those conversations amongst colleagues are really important as well. And just trying to learn from others in your setting with the systems you have and things. How do people try and work within them in a way that doesn't, leave them feeling burnt out? Because
Yeah,
as you say, once you become burnt out, um, that's going to cause a lot. You think you're keeping going to help everyone else, but actually that causes more problems down the
it
line.
does. And it's, once you've had that level of burnout, it's really hard to come back from that. I think all the way through the episodes that we do, we're going to keep coming back to the thing that conversation is key, conversation is key. Again, thinking about this subject, working with a setting where they said, my head of department or my head of early years says to us that she works when she can around her family. And she sends out emails sometime at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And it says at the bottom of an email, I send this out in my working time. There is no expectation to reply. and they'd all agreed on that as being a positive thing. But what was really interesting in the conversation was this person was saying, but as soon as I receive it in my inbox or on my phone, more likely, even though I know there is no expectation to reply, my head clicks into work. I still feel the expectation to reply. I still have to really fight the urge to open it just to see what it's about. But they were said we've got to a position where people weren't sending emails all the time with an expectation, but now we don't seem to be that much better off because I still feel the expectation, even though we've all said there is no expectation. So it's about things like, can you have an agreement that you draft your emails and they only go out at whatever it is, 8 o'clock in the morning? Do they have to go straight out? Or can it be that you can mute those accounts? But again, thinking about that, remembering to do it, or feeling like you are the bullshit practitioner who's saying, actually, I don't work at weekends and actually I don't work past 10 o'clock. Again, there's a culture, if you're the person that puts your hand up, they're a bit like, oh, hang on then. So are you not as committed to the job as the rest of us? And it's trying to change that, but that takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the email thing is really interesting. That's come up a lot in the conversations we've been having. And I do find that particularly interesting because when I was, working in classrooms in schools rather than at university, emails was such a small part of our job. And now it's exploded,
Everything.
hasn't it? And
Yeah.
that's added an extra layer of workload that just wasn't there before. Yeah, and people do, as you say, have mixed views about that, about what's the best system to do for it. I mean, I think personally, for me, yeah, not having them come through to your phone is an absolute must. And I think that's quite easy to do at an individual level, regardless of what anybody else does. So, for example, I can access them on my phone. If I need to go in and check something because something's popped into my head, but I have to go in and log. I don't get any notifications whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think if I didn't have that strategy in place, I would just be a mess because, as you say, I would not be able to not open it. I know that's what I'm like. So I think that's a really simple thing that people can do because then they simply don't know if they're getting emails or not. I think the question of whether to send them within, whether you should be allowed to send them outside of working hours is an interesting one because I know some people say it's really important for their well-being that they can work flexibly, and some people say things like, oh well, I get up really early on a Saturday morning, and while the kids are out at football practice or whatever, that's the time I want to get stuff done. And if you're in a leadership role, that does involve some emails often, doesn't it? But yeah, I know some schools have got around it by asking staff to put the so you don't have to remember to do it at 8 in the morning. You can set up an automatic thing, can't you, so that
Yeah,
they
put it in draft and
get there
send it.
and then they get sent out automatically. You can schedule them. So that's one way around it. Or you can say, as a school, well, we're going to send them whenever we want because we know we all work differently. But we're not going to have, we're going to have everybody turning the notifications off so nobody you get them when you're in your online time. That's.
And I think there's got to be some autonomy and also some responsibility. And I think, from this episode, one of the biggest points is that resilience is not just about bouncing back, and resilience is not just about pushing through. Resilience is about having strategies for you and your mental health as a human being outside of your work as a professional. And in the next episode, we're going to be chatting a little bit more about that and also the kind of practices that educators can do to build and support their own resilience. So for now, that's been really fascinating, Steph. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Steph, for joining us and providing us with such valuable information and insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Steph Ainsworth. Now, if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes and be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content that will include ideas for your setting and links to loads of relevant resources.